So this was not the video I was going to release next. That one's still in the works, but I have some thoughts I need to get out on this new Magdalena Bay album because honestly, I have questions. If you aren't aware, indie pop duo Magdalena Bay recently released their second studio album titled IMAGINAL DISK, and the reception it's been getting in online circles is insanely positive. I've been seeing a lot of AOTY labels being thrown its way, and it's even getting to the point that certain people are throwing the overrated label onto it too. Gotta love labels. Personally, I was extremely excited for this album. I loved all the singles, and I even participated in the countdown to its release, which I almost never do because I tend to go to sleep around the same time as a retired person. But the 22 more minutes tweet had to be posted. I wasn't about to miss out on that. So I listened to IMAGINAL DISK right when it came out, and I thought it was good. I was definitely not as crazy about it as I thought I was gonna be, and not like others were upon their first listen. But I didn't really think much of it, and I chalked it up to being just a first listen. I listened again the next day because I had a pretty long drive ahead of me and something needed to fill the time. And weirdly enough, I left my second listen feeling pretty much the same way, if not less positively. I knew I liked a lot of the material being presented, but I didn't love it like I thought I was going to. So I knew going into my next listen I was gonna pay a little more attention and really try to figure out why this album wasn't clicking with me like it was for literally so many other people. And what I came up with is, in my eyes, a very valid critique that I haven't really seen anybody else talk about online. The discussion right now is pretty much either this is the best album of all time or lol mid, and I don't think the answer is quite that simple. One of the first things I noticed about IMAGINAL DISK is that it is a lot more cohesive and streamlined than the duo's first album, we're not doing this again. Mercurial World, which I covered in this video where I directly compared it to Art Angels. Watch that after this, please. Mercurial World was a lot more adventurous when it came to genre experimentation, and IMAGINAL DISK seems to very rarely stray away from digital synth-pop territory. There's less instruments used in the production. Guitars, strings, and synths make up a majority of the sonic palette here. I don't think this is a bad thing at all, but the pared down list of instruments gives away a major issue a lot of these songs have for me, and that has to do with instrumental build and song structure. Magbay have been very transparent about the fact that this time around they are focused on outros, meaning a lot of the instrumental focus comes in the last portion of these songs. If sonic experimentation was the name of the game on Mercurial World, song structure is that on IMAGINAL DISK. But a lot of the time when artists experiment with song structure, these experiments do not always pan out. My biggest complaint with a good portion of the songs on IMAGINAL DISK is that the focus is placed on these big wow moments that come at the end of each song. Think the outros on Killing Time, Image, Watching TV, Tunnel Vision. All of these songs have outros that feature some super impressive production trickery, but let's be honest, when you're listening to these songs, do you remember the entire thing or just the last minute or 30 seconds? For most of the songs I just listed, when I'm listening, I'm kinda just waiting for the big finish, because what comes before that is either nondescript or even a little boring. It's like so much of the attention was placed on these outros that the first part of the song is just there to set that outro up instead of the whole song being enjoyable. It reads as gimmicky. I will say that Tunnel Vision is kind of an outlier here though. I actually enjoy the first part of that song more than its outro. But on the other hand, I think Killing Time and Watching TV are the biggest offenders of this. The quality divide between the first part and the outro on both songs is glaringly obvious. I also want to talk about Image specifically, because I do really like it, but for a while after it came out, I knew there was something about the song that was holding me back from truly loving it like everybody else did. Like yes, it's iconic, 22 more minutes, like yes, work, all that. But there's this one portion right after the first chorus where you think it's gonna launch into a post-chorus or go right into the second verse, but instead there's just some instrumental playing around that doesn't really seem to have a purpose. And then the second verse just starts out of nowhere. I knew that was my main issue with the song before putting it in the context of the album, but now after hearing all of these outro-focused songs, it's apparent to me that Image is just killing time, one might say. Until that big loud buzzy bass part at the end of the song, which was a disappointing realization. There's a lot of things I love about that song, but structure is not one of them. This outro problem is even more apparent when songs like Death and Romance and Vampire in the Corner have instrumental builds that lead to outros and yet are still enjoyable all the way through. Death and Romance is far and away the best song on this album simply because every section feels like it had an equal amount of attention paid to it. The verses hit just as much as the chorus, and the outro is there to extend the story of the song, not to be the song's entire focus. I don't want this to come across as me saying these songs shouldn't have instrumental builds, and the energy should be the same the entire way through. Magbay has proven in the past that they can kill an instrumental build. Cherry is an obvious example. I talked about that ad nauseum in the album battles video. But when the entire song is framed around the last minute or the last 30 seconds, the rest of the song needs to keep up quality-wise, and I don't think that happens with a good handful of these tracks. Now that's not to say that every single song here is structured in the exact same way. She Looked Like Me, Love Is Everywhere, That's My Floor, and the last three tracks don't really have that type of flashy outro. And some of them even experiment with structure in a different way, like She Looked Like Me. I love the structure of that song. But also that doesn't mean I don't have complaints about some of these other tracks as well. Love Is Everywhere is a pretty blatant skip for me. I don't see how it fits into the story of this album at all, especially being placed right after Tunnel Vision, which is pretty integral to that story. And I'm hesitant to say this because I know how much y'all are living for it, but I don't think Cry For Me is as that girl. It's too long and drawn out for what they were going for on there, and I think it gets old around halfway through. I am a little disappointed in Imaginal Disc, I'm not gonna lie, especially because of how much I love Mercurial World. A lot of people online know me for being a big proponent of that album, so to not enjoy its successor as much as I wanted to is not a great feeling. But also, that brings up 2 points I want to end on here. The first being that Mercurial World itself was a huge grower for me when I first heard that album. I remember on my first listen, I got to Secrets and I turned it off because I thought it wasn't for me. But over time I just kept trying until it clicked, which is sometimes what it takes. I did the same with that ML Butch album, and Rocket by Alex G, which is one of my favorite albums of all time now. I even recently got into Always after thinking their music was boring for years now. It just took me some time to understand it. So I think it's important to keep in mind before you write a nasty comment that these are just my initial thoughts. I don't think it's completely out of the question that I might warm up to Imaginal Disc eventually. It's just that I'm not enjoying it nearly as much as I was anticipating, which leads me to my second point. I severely overhyped this album for myself, and because of that, I ended up a little disappointed. This album is by no means bad, but because I was hyping it up to be the best thing since sliced bread, I kinda set myself up in a way. Unfortunately, not every album is gonna be Fetch the Bolt Cutters and surpass every expectation by a fucking mile after 8 years of anticipation. The singles on Imaginal Disc were singles for a reason, and the rest of the songs I think are okay, and that's okay. So that's my hot take for the day. I'm sure a lot of you are gonna highly disagree, but that's my story and I'm sticking to it. Unless I change my mind by the end of the year and this ends up being my AOTY, but also Brat and Quantum Baby are pulling at each other's wigs as we speak, and Charm is watching silently in the corner waiting for her moment, so that's probably not gonna happen. Let me know your thoughts on Imaginal Disc below, because I'm very curious to see if any of y'all actually agree with me, and I'll see you in the next video.